My sister-in-law tried to take my kids after my wife died. She called CPS on me, but the judge's decision left her speechless. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but here I am. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, and I'm still processing everything that's happened. But I feel like I need to get this off my chest, and maybe it'll help someone else who's going through a similar situation. So, here goes. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for 12 wonderful years. We met in college. She was the vibrant art major who literally ran into me, a reserved engineering student, on her way to class, spilling coffee all over both of us. It was like a scene from a romantic comedy, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. We had two amazing kids together, Emily, 10, and Max, 7. Emily is our little artist, always covered in paint or glitter, with an imagination that knows no bounds. Max is our sports enthusiast, equally happy kicking a soccer ball or solving math problems. They were the perfect blend of Sarah and me, and watching them grow was the greatest joy of our lives. Life wasn't perfect, but it was pretty damn close. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our favorite family activities. Every Friday night was pizza and board game night, a tradition that often ended in playful arguments and fits of laughter. Saturdays were for adventures, whether it was hiking in the nearby state park, visiting a new museum, or just exploring a different part of our city. Sundays were our lazy days, filled with pancakes, cartoons, and just being together. Sarah was the glue that held us all together, always finding ways to make even the most mundane days feel special. She had this ability to turn ordinary moments into memories. Like the time she declared a backwards day when Emily was feeling down about a poor grade. We ate dessert for breakfast, wore our clothes backwards, and even tried to talk in reverse. It was ridiculous, but it had us all in stitches by the end of the day. Then, about a year ago, our world came crashing down. It started with Sarah feeling unusually tired. At first, we chalked it up to the stress of her new job as an art teacher at the local high school. But when she started having persistent headaches and unexplained weight loss, we knew something was wrong. The day we got the diagnosis is etched in my memory. Sarah had gone in for some tests, and I was at work when she called. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she had been crying. "John," she said, "can you come to the hospital? The doctor. He wants to talk to both of us." I felt my heart drop. I mumbled something to my boss about a family emergency and raced to the hospital. The next hour was a blur of medical terms and grim faces. Aggressive brain cancer. Inoperable. 6 months to a year with treatment. We sat in stunned silence in the car afterward, holding hands so tightly it hurt. Finally, Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We need to tell the kids," she said. "And then we fight. For them." Telling Emily and Max was the hardest thing we'd ever done. We decided to be honest but hopeful. There were tears, questions we couldn't answer, and hugs that seemed to last for hours. But true to her nature, Sarah found a way to bring light to even this darkest of moments. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said, a mischievous glint in her eye despite her tears. "Ice cream for dinner. Doctor's orders." And so began our battle. We fought hard, tried every treatment available. Sarah's strength amazed me every day. Even on her worst days, when the chemo left her weak and nauseous, she found ways to make the kids smile. She started a project with them, a massive scrapbook filled with photos, drawings, and little notes. "So you'll always have a piece of me," she told them. But in the end, we lost her. Sarah passed away 6 months after the diagnosis, leaving me a widower and single father to 2 heartbroken children. She died at home, surrounded by her family, on a crisp autumn day. Her last words to me were, "Take care of our babies. And don't you dare let them forget how to laugh." The grief was overwhelming. There were days I could barely get out of bed, but I had to keep going for Emily and Max. They needed me more than ever, and I was determined to be there for them, to honor Sarah's memory by being the best father I could be. The first few weeks were a fog of grief, casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, and sleepless nights. Emily became withdrawn, spending hours working on the scrapbook she and Sarah had started. Max, on the other hand, became clingy, barely letting me out of his sight. I was struggling to keep it all together, to be both mother and father to my grieving children while dealing with my own pain. Enter Karen, my sister-in-law. Sarah's older sister had always been a bit intense. She and Sarah were close, but there was always an undercurrent of competition between them. Karen was single, no kids, and had a successful career in finance. She'd always been critical of our quaint lifestyle, as she called it. Karen and Sarah had a complicated relationship. Growing up, Karen had always been the golden child, top grades, athletic achievements, and a driven personality that our in-laws adored. Sarah was the free spirit, the artist who marched to the beat of her own drum. I remember Sarah telling me about the time she decided to dye her hair bright blue in high school. Karen had been horrified, lecturing her about ruining her chances for success. But Sarah just laughed it off, saying, "Not everyone's path to happiness involves a corner office, sis." Despite their differences, the sisters had grown closer in adulthood. Karen had been genuinely happy at our wedding, and she doted on Emily and Max when they were born. But there was always a hint of condescension in her interactions with us, as if she were observing a quaint social experiment. At first, Karen was supportive after Sarah's death. She helped with the funeral arrangements and stayed with us for a couple of weeks after Sarah passed. She took charge of coordinating meals from neighbors and fielding calls from concerned friends. I was grateful for her help, especially in those early days when I could barely think straight. But as time went on, her true colors started to show. It started with little comments here and there. "Oh, you're letting Emily wear that to school?" Or "Max seems a bit thin, are you feeding him enough?" I brushed it off as her way of coping with grief, maybe trying to fill the void Sarah left behind. Then came the suggestions that felt more like criticisms. She started rearranging things in the house, claiming she was just tidying up. She'd make offhand remarks about how the kids needed more structure, more discipline. Sarah was always too lax with them, she'd say, as if her sister's parenting style was somehow to blame for our current struggles. I tried to be patient, reminding myself that Karen was grieving too. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to bite my tongue, especially when her comments upset the kids. One particularly bad day, about 2 months after Sarah's passing, Karen's meddling came to a head. I came home from work to find Emily in tears and Max sulking in his room. It turned out Karen had taken it upon herself to clean out Sarah's art studio, a room we had left untouched since her death. "The kids need to move on," Karen explained when I confronted her. "All these reminders, it's not healthy." I was livid. "That wasn't your decision to make," I told her, my voice shaking with anger. "This is our home, and those were Sarah's things. The kids will move on in their own time, in their own way." Karen looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Clearly, you're not thinking straight, John. The children need guidance, structure. They need their father," I cut her off. "And right now, you need to leave." That night, as I helped Emily and Max sort through the boxes of Sarah's art supplies, trying to salvage what we could, I realized that this situation with Karen was far from over. I was right. Karen started showing up unannounced at our house, often when I was at work and the kids were with their after-school sitter. She'd interrogate the poor college student I'd hired, asking about their qualifications and our daily routines. Aunt Karen asked if we were eating vegetables, Max reported one evening. She said we looked pale. Emily chimed in, she told me my clothes were wrinkled and asked if you knew how to use an iron. I reassured the kids that everything was fine, but inside, I was seething. Who did Karen think she was? One day, about 3 months after Sarah's passing, Karen cornered me in the kitchen while the kids were watching TV in the living room. "Look, John," she said, her voice low and intense. "I've been thinking. Maybe it would be best if the kids came to live with me for a while." I was stunned. "What are you talking about, Karen?" She sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "You're clearly struggling. The house is a mess, the kids seem off. I have the resources to give them a stable environment. It's what Sarah would have wanted." I felt a surge of anger. "With all due respect, Karen, you have no idea what Sarah would have wanted. These are my children, and they're staying with me. We're grieving, yes, but we're managing. Please don't overstep." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that," she said ominously before leaving. I should have known then that this was far from over. A week later, I got a call from Child Protective Services. Someone had reported concerns about the well-being of my children. As the social worker interviewed me and inspected our home, it became clear who had made the call. The CPS visit was nerve-wracking, but ultimately, they found no cause for concern. The social worker, a kind woman named Ms. Rodriguez, even commended me on how well we were coping given the circumstances. "Mr. Johnson," she said as she was leaving, "I can see that you're doing your best in a difficult situation. Your children seem well cared for and loved. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need support or resources." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen started a smear campaign among our family and friends. She told anyone who would listen that I was an unfit father, that the kids were suffering, that she was the only one who could provide them with a proper upbringing. Some people believed her, and I started getting concerned calls and visits from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My parents, bless them, saw right through Karen's manipulations. Mom started coming over more often, helping with housework and giving the kids some much-needed grandparent time. Dad, never one for confrontation, surprised me by calling Karen directly. "You listen here," I overheard him saying, his voice uncharacteristically stern. "What you're doing is wrong, Karen. John is a good father, and those kids need stability, not your meddling. Sarah would be ashamed of you." But even with my parents' support, the situation was taking its toll. I was constantly on edge, worried about what Karen might do next. The kids picked up on the tension, becoming more anxious and clingy. Emily started having nightmares. One night, I found her curled up in Sarah's closet, clutching one of her mom's old sweaters. "I dreamed that Aunt Karen took us away," she sobbed. "I don't want to leave, Dad. I want to stay here with you." I held her close, my heart breaking. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart, I promised. I won't let that happen." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure how I could keep that promise. Karen seemed determined to take the kids, and I was afraid she might find a way to do it. The final straw came when Karen filed for custody of Emily and Max. Her petition was full of exaggerations and outright lies. She claimed I was neglectful, possibly abusive, and that the children were in danger living with me. I was served with papers on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember standing in the driveway, holding the envelope, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. How had it come to this? How could Karen, Sarah's own sister, do this to us? That night, after the kids were in bed, I broke down. I sat on the floor of Sarah's closet, surrounded by her clothes that still held a faint trace of her scent, and I cried. I cried for the loss of my wife, for the pain my children were going through, and for the battle I now face to keep our family together. As I sat there, drowning in my grief and fear, a memory surfaced. It was from the last week of Sarah's life, during a rare moment when she was lucid and pain-free. We were sitting in the backyard, watching Emily and Max play on the swing set we had built together years ago. Sarah turned to me, her eyes bright despite the pallor of her skin. "John," she said, squeezing my hand. "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I replied, fighting back tears. "Promise me you'll fight for them. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to come between you, promise me you'll always put our children first. They're going to need you more than ever." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Sarah smiled, that radiant smile that had made me fall in love with her all those years ago. "You're stronger than you know, John. And you're an amazing father. Don't ever forget that." As I sat there on the closet floor, surrounded by Sarah's memories, I found my strength. I remembered my promise to her, and I knew I couldn't give up. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Linda Cho came highly recommended, known for her expertise in family law and her fierce advocacy for her clients. From our first meeting, I knew I had made the right choice. Linda listened to my story with a mix of sympathy and determination. "What your sister-in-law is doing is despicable," she said. "But don't worry. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." Over the next few weeks, Linda and I worked tirelessly to build our case. We gathered character references from friends, neighbors, and the kids' teachers. We documented every aspect of our daily lives, showing how well the children were adjusting despite their loss. Ms. Rodriguez, the CPS social worker, even agreed to testify on my behalf, stating that she had found no evidence of neglect or abuse in our home. As we prepared for the hearing, I tried to keep things as normal as possible for Emily and Max. We continued our Friday game nights, though they were quieter without Sarah's infectious laughter. We visited her grave every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers and sharing stories about our week. One Sunday, as we sat by Sarah's headstone, Max looked up at me with serious eyes. "Dad," he said, "is Aunt Karen going to take us away?" My heart clenched. I pulled both kids close to me. "No, buddy," I said firmly. "I promise you, both of you, that I will do everything in my power to keep us together. We're a family, and nothing is going to change that." Emily, always perceptive, asked, "Is that why you've been talking to the lawyer lady?" I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes, even when grown-ups disagree, they need other grown-ups to help them sort things out. But I don't want you to worry about this, okay? Your job is to be kids, to go to school, to play, and to remember how much Mom loved you." As we drove home that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for custody, I was fighting for the life Sarah and I had built, for the future we had dreamed of for our children. As the court date approached, Karen ramped up her efforts. She sent a barrage of texts and emails, alternating between guilt-tripping me and making veiled threats. I forwarded everything to Linda, who advised me to cease all communication with Karen except through our lawyers. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with all the what-ifs. What if the judge believed Karen's lies? What if I lost my children? How could I go on without them? In the early hours of the morning, I found myself in Sarah's studio. I hadn't been in there much since her death, it was still too painful. But that night, surrounded by her paintings and half-finished projects, I felt close to her. As I flipped through Sarah's sketchbook, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a letter from Sarah, written during her final days. Her words gave me strength and renewed my determination to fight for our family. The day of the hearing arrived. I dressed in my best suit, the one Sarah had always said made me look handsome and trustworthy. As I helped Emily and Max get ready for school, they would be staying with a close friend during the hearing, I tried to project an air of calm confidence. "Everything's going to be okay," I told them, pulling them both into a hug. "I promise." Emily, wise beyond her years, looked up at me with Sarah's eyes. "We know, Dad. We trust you." Those words gave me the final boost of courage I needed. The courtroom was intimidating, all polished wood and stern faces. Karen sat on one side with her lawyer, shooting me venomous looks. I took my place beside Linda, trying to keep my breathing steady. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, called the court to order. Karen's lawyer went first, painting a picture of me as a grieving widower unable to cope with the demands of parenthood. He brought up the CPS visit, twisting it to make it sound like there had been genuine concerns. When it was our turn, Linda systematically dismantled each of Karen's arguments. She presented evidence of the stable and loving home I provided for Emily and Max. Character witnesses spoke about my dedication as a father, both before and after Sarah's passing. Ms. Rodriguez's testimony was particularly impactful, describing a household that was coping admirably with grief, with children who felt safe and loved. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I spoke about Sarah, about the life we had built together, and about the promises we had made to our children. I didn't just talk about my right to raise them, I talked about their right to grow up in the home their mother and I created for them. As I spoke, I saw Karen's composed mask slipping, revealing the desperation beneath. After a brief recess, the judge delivered her verdict. "After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, I find no reason to grant the petitioner's request for custody," she said. "Mr. Johnson has demonstrated that he is a loving and capable father, providing a stable home for his children during an incredibly difficult time." The judge then addressed Karen directly, admonishing her for her actions and the unnecessary trauma she had caused our family. With a bang of her gavel, it was over. We had won. That evening, as I tucked Emily and Max into bed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We weren't magically healed, the loss of Sarah was still a raw wound, but we were together, and we were safe. "Dad," Max said sleepily as I kissed his forehead, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, buddy. We're going to be okay." It's been 6 months since the court hearing. Karen eventually apologized and has been slowly rebuilding her relationship with us. As for us, we're taking it one day at a time. There are still difficult moments, but there's also laughter, love, and the unbreakable bond of our little family. We have a new tradition of Mom Memories Night every week, where we share stories and look at old photos, keeping Sarah's spirit alive in our home. To anyone out there facing a similar battle, I want you to know, you're stronger than you think. Keep fighting for what matters. Keep honoring the love that remains. And never, ever give up. Because in the end, love wins. Family wins. And sometimes, justice prevails in the most beautiful ways.